Okay, cage to part two. Today we're going to talk a little bit about the movable shapes as they relate back to the cage position theory. That's really all we're trying to do is to understand the way that this position theory works on the neck of the guitar, and it'll give us a reference point for different scales and chords and arpeggios and that sort of thing moving forward. There is a PDF to go along with this lesson, as well as the lesson from last time, part one, so if you haven't looked at that, you might want to check that out. Well, all we're going to really do today is just to get used to the different positions and closed forms and how they move up and down the neck. Next time, we're going to start putting these together and moving them in sequence in a single key, starting from the open positions and then moving up the neck. The goal really is to just understand these and to be able to not talk about them so literally going forward, and to just understand that these positions exist and that the majority of what you're going to be referencing in standard tuning is going to come from these forms in one way or another. The forms will get altered a little bit here and there. There's definitely more than the five, but these five are very commonly referred to and very helpful as just general reference. So the better you know it, the better off you'll be going forward. So as a general review, very quickly, we had five shapes in the first open position: C, A, G, E, and D. And the two important things to remember would be where the roots are for each of those, and then, you know, how the order or the sequence goes depending on which one of the shapes you start on. And that's going to be important as you start moving up the neck with these as well. So the first part of that, you know, the C and the A are both fifth string roots. The G and the E are both sixth string roots. And the D is a fourth string root. And you're always going to go C, A, G, E, D in that sequence no matter what you start on. So if you start on C, you're going to go A, G, E, D, and then you'd start on C again. If you start on A, you go through that sequence until you get to A. So it would be A, G, E, D, C, and then A, and so on and so forth. Again, this is all in the first lesson. So as we take these out of the first position, you know, you could take these chords and move them like this. So here's a C form. If I move it up, say, to the third position, it's kind of a, you know, C, it is definitely a D-type chord. You're going up a whole step in that form. But because we lose the open strings, we're going to have some different tones in there that change the harmony. Might be a harmony you want to use. That's great. Use it. It just doesn't make it a movable shape, because if I moved up another half step from the D to, say, E flat, you know, it's another good sound, I guess. You know, if you want to use it, go for it. But it's definitely leaving that major tonality that we had when we played C. So as you move these up the neck, you're going to have to also bring the open strings with you that you're not fretting when you play the open chord. So if I was to do that with the C, I would have to refinger it like this, and I would get this chord, that first string there. And that's now the fifth string C shape. And so, you know, if I move that back, you can see, you know, like if I didn't have that there, or that was like playing the first string, it's the same as doing this. Hopefully that makes sense. So we have our C shape like this. Now the A should be a familiar form for you, because if you're playing A here and you move this guy up and you bring the open strings with you, you get this major bar chord from the fifth string that you probably played a lot. I mean, people finger it sometimes like this, and that's fine, but the notes are going to be the same. So here's our A shape. So now we have our C. So C shape here, and then A shape. The G is another one that, you know, you might not use in this form when we take this position here. Oops. And we move it up to second position. We have to bring our first finger to the bar, and here we have our G shape played from the sixth string here. So that's something that you might not play, but you're definitely going to reference that as a position or a partial, like the long A is actually this G, if you know the long A. So now we've got our C chord shape, our A shape, and our G shape. Now our next chord here in the sequence is the E. This is another one similar to the A shape, where if you bring this up, you should recognize that bar chord. So that's just the same thing as this guy moved up. So now we have our C, our A, our G, and now our E. And finally, we have our D shape. This guy is another tricky one to play, 4-string root. But again, it's not so much the chord form itself that you're going to have to be playing, it's just being aware of what to do in a position that references this. Okay? I don't really play this one that often myself. I usually do the C shape when I want these intervals because they overlap. We'll talk about that in a later exercise. So let's go through them again. So we have C, C shape, sorry, A shape, G shape, E shape, and then finally our D shape. And what I would suggest doing with these is to just take them one at a time and start moving up and down the neck. And I like to always kind of hit the root and then say whatever the chord is. So in this case, the C shape is a 5th-string root. So if you were to start there, it would be, you know, D, because that's the 5th fret D. So I would just go D, and then you could just go by the alphabet, E, F, and so on. And it's good to hit that root and then, you know, say what it is just to reinforce, because that's what you're trying to do, is just map and reinforce. You could do chromatically, so you go so D, and then D sharp or E flat, and then E and F. And a lot of times, you know, students ask me, well, how do I know if it's D sharp or E flat? And I mean, it matters if you're taking like a theory test, or if you really have to define the tonality or the extension or the reference to the key, because that's really what it has to do with. And harmonically or sonically, there's really no difference. You don't know. It's just the sound. So as a general rule, you just have to kind of reference in thirds most of the time, or extensions, and back to the key. Usually you don't have a lot of sharps and flats happening within a key, but if you have accidentals and you have substitutions and things like that, then you're going to definitely have that. If I'm doing an exercise, or if a student's doing an exercise, I usually say, if you're ascending, think sharp, and then if you're descending, think flats, and then you just can kind of do both. So that doing the same thing, you'd go C, or I'm sorry, D, D sharp, and then E, and F, and then if we went back, you go E. Now we say E flat, and then D. Okay? So remember, you know, this A shape is also 5th string, and then the G shape is 6th string, E shape is 6th string, and D shape is 4th string. Okay? And I would just do that with all of them, like starting from the D, F, I'm sorry, be E, F, using that shape. So you can see, even, you know, I have a little bit of trouble doing them just cold like that. The more you practice them, the better off you'll be. As a fingerstyle player, there are a lot of players that use these full voicings, and you'll see it, especially the jazz players that are going to be playing a lot of flat keys and stuff, and they're not going to be relying so much on the open chords. So, you know, keep your eyes out, because in standard tuning, these are just going to come over and over and over again. You're going to see them. A really good example of this style player, there's not a lot of video, but Reverend Gary Davis really made a lot of great use out of this style of, you know, chord voicing. And sometimes you might not be able to recognize some of the things he did with his hand as the same chords, but if you are a little familiar with them, they'll just jump right out. The idea is that you're just trying to keep that melody on the top string or two, and you're just going to have to decide, you know, how to do that based on these chord forms. As we go into 7th chords and so on and so forth, you're going to still have, you know, these reference points, even though you're going to have more harmony and the shapes change a little bit, but they're still going to go back to these 5, at least in part. So the better you understand them going forward, the better off you'll be. And so I really want, you know, you to remember that when you're practicing these. It's not so much mastery, it's just remembering, you know, kind of what you're doing and where they're coming from. So when you start to apply, you'll be able to recover these shapes a little bit more quickly. So hopefully that works for you. Remember, you can contact me here. You can contact me on my website. That's where you'll find the PDF. I do lessons in the Detroit area, but I also do Skype lessons, so hit me up if that's something that interests you. And until next time, happy picking.